As we've discussed with Scrum, there's several ceremonies that are done on a daily or by sprint basis. So what we want to do here is just give you some context, give you some understanding of what your calendar could look like with those various ceremonies, whether you're using a 1-week sprint versus a 2-week sprint. So the one we're going to look at first is the 1-week sprint. The first day of the sprint, our first thing, we have our sprint planning. That's pretty obvious. We need to go through, we need to plan out our sprint. We need to make our commitments of the user stories that we're going to be completing in that sprint. So that's on Monday morning. Sometimes it's even done the day previous, prior to Monday, so that way it can be planned and committed to prior to the sprint actual starting. But nonetheless, there's a sprint planning meeting that's done right at the beginning of that sprint. The second day, all we're doing is our daily scrum. Remember, that's our daily stand-up meeting, 15 minutes, get in a room, talk about what we worked on yesterday, what we're working on today, and any impediments or roadblocks or issues that the team is running into. So that Tuesday, that second day of the sprint, is really a big work day. Wednesday, we again do the daily scrum. Obviously, that's going to be a daily occurrence where we go over those 3 questions. What did I work on yesterday? What am I working on today? And what are issues or roadblocks that I'm running into? Also on that third day of the sprint, however, we have our backlog refinement or grooming. And what we're doing is we're actually grooming or refining the product backlog. That sprint backlog that we've committed to is being worked and we're moving that forward. Now we're looking at that product backlog and we're going through and we're making sure that our next batch of user stories have enough details in there to be estimated and to eventually be committed on in a future sprint. So we go through, we're grooming and refining those user stories. The fourth day is the sprint in a 1-week sprint. We have our daily scrum, our daily stand-ups. We do that. And on the last day, we're again doing our daily stand-up. But later in the afternoon, we have 2 additional ceremonies. The first ceremony that's usually scheduled is the sprint review. This is where we're going to demo out, show off what we completed as part of that sprint, maybe identify those user stories that we committed to but for some reason wasn't able to get done, talk about those user stories that maybe we didn't commit to but were able to get complete if we were ahead of schedule, and that sort of thing. So we have that sprint review, and then usually either right after that or shortly after that, we have our sprint retrospective. This is where we get together with the team and we're discussing how did the sprint go? Are there things that we can do differently? Did we overcommit, undercommit? Were there certain roles, responsibilities that people had that we could accomplish? So that is done as part of that sprint retrospective. And that's what your calendar could look like with a 1-week sprint. And honestly, trying to get that much work done or get user stories done in 5 days is extremely difficult. You really have to break those user stories down. So most often, I don't see a lot of companies going with the 1-week sprint. Most of them are going with a 2-week sprint. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one next. The first thing you'll notice is the first ceremony is exactly the same. We have our sprint planning. Regardless of the length of your sprint, you need to plan out that sprint. There's commitments that need to be made on those user stories that are going to be completed as part of that sprint. But what you will notice is because it's a 2-week sprint rather than a 1-week sprint planning can last up to 4 hours, which is quite a bit longer than what we had in the 1-week side. The second day, we have the same thing. We have our daily scrum or our daily stand-up, 15-minute meeting. We're getting together, talking about what we worked on yesterday, what we're working on today, and any impediments or roadblocks we're running into. Third day of the sprint, very similar to the week 1 or 1-week sprint, and that is the fact that we are doing backlog refinement and grooming. This is refining and grooming the backlog stories that are on that product backlog, not the sprint backlog. What we've committed to as part of this sprint is locked in. We shouldn't be hopefully updating those user stories at all. They're all estimated and ready to roll, but we are going through and making sure that the other user stories out in that product backlog have enough information that they can be prioritized, estimated, and hopefully committed to in a future sprint. The remainder of that first week, we are just doing our daily stand-up. So the week 1 is usually a very busy work week as you're getting started on those user stories and moving them along. Let's take a look at week 2. Second week of the sprint is very similar. We started off that first day, it's a full work day other than our daily stand-up. On that Tuesday, we have our daily stand-up and then a backlog refinement or grooming. Generally, you're doing those once a week. So we've got that. We then have our daily stand-ups on the next 2 days. And the last day of the sprint, again, same as the 1 week sprint, we have our daily stand-up. Later in the afternoon, we have our sprint review and then sprint retrospective. Those meetings are going to probably last a little bit longer. You're generally going to have a little bit more to talk about because you've attempted or hopefully completed additional user stories or more user stories in a 2 week sprint than what you would in a 1 week sprint. So I hope going through and giving just these brief examples do help you to understand kind of what your daily routine would look like as you're working in this. We do have these calendars available for download as PDF files on this lecture. So go out there, snag them, and go ahead and put them with your notes. Use them for context and reference.